آپ کو ذاتی ہے.
گھڑی مولانا صاحب دیکھ دیں گے وہاں پہ, آپ نے اس کے پیچھے لگا دیا, بجائے کہ 2 بیٹری لگا دیں اس میں.
بیٹری تو ہے میرے پاس سے.
ہاں اس کی بیٹری اس میں لگا دو.
ہٹا دیتے ہیں گھڑی,
جو مولانا صاحب دیکھتے ہیں اسی وجہ سے رکھا تھا اس کو. ٹائم کی پابندی نہیں رہے, وہیں رکھ دے میرا خیال ہے.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين, والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين, واللعن على أعدائهم أجمعين من عداوتهم إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد, فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد والفرقانه الحميد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى. ثم قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم إني تارك فيكم الثقلين, كتاب الله وإترتي وأهل بيتي. صدق الله العلي العظيم, وصدق رسوله النبي الأمين الكريم. صلوات السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله, وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله عبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار, ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزياراتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين, لا سيما أبا الفضل العباس وعلي الأكبر. صلوات. Continuing from yesterday, I touched upon a topic which I will be discussing for the next 9-10 days. It was a topic dealing with the 2 basic sources of Islam, the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet. You've heard this word before. The word I'm repeating, you have heard it in Urdu many times, and maybe not in English, and that is the talking Quran and the silent Quran. Quran-i-Natiq or Quran-i-Samit. Who is the Quran-i-Natiq? The speaking Quran? No, it's actually the Prophet. The Prophet is the talking Quran. Because during the time of the Prophet, the point which you have made the Ahlul Bayt, I'll come to that later, because that is then comes to succession. But the talking Quran is actually our Prophet. He is the one, because I'm not going to repeat anything from yesterday. I assume that you've listened and some of you absorbed and some of, because if I go over the points again, it takes 5 to 10 minutes to repeat everything I've said. So I hope that people have listened, so that, because this is basically a continuation of one factor connected to the next factor, because this is all interwoven as a dialogue, as a bayan, and as a lecture for my brothers. So it is interconnected. And maybe those of you who come late, I will try to sort of make it that you could come in any stage of this and still try to keep up with this. So we have the Quran. the Quran in itself, can it teach us how to read the namaz? If you gave this Quran to a new Muslim, a convert, and you told him, right, this is the Quran, and go away and become a good Muslim, he won't be able to. He won't be able to read the namaz. He will not be able to perform the hajj. He will not know how to do the zakat. He will not know how to do the khums. All these issues will not be available in the Quran. The Quran actually gives us something which some people misunderstand, and that is Quran gives principles. You have to do this. You have to do this. You have to perform this. It gives you the principles of what to do, but does not give the details. In some matters, there are details. For wuzu, for example, that is clearly stated on how to perform the wuzu. It is clearly stated how to keep the fast. Despite being categorical nas of the Quran, saying that you have to perform things like this, they still do things different than what the Quran is demanding. Fascinating. People say that, okay, the Quran doesn't give details of everything, but where it does give details, people still do not implement those details. Where the Quran is saying do something like this, they do it like that. Now, the Quran Samit is the Quran which we have in our hands. But the Quran Natiq is actually, this word, Quran Natiq, I was thinking about this, the Quran Natiq has a very, very important meaning. We just listen to it, hear it, and goes out the other ear. But Quran Natiq is actually Allah informing this. Another thing which I think is important is to know that whatever the Prophet says is actually from Allah. We have different types of wahy. We have Hadith al-Qudsi, we have the revelation of the Quran, and we have Ilham. The Prophet was inspired on all occasions. The Prophet was inspired on all occasions. And you know, there are people amongst the Muslims who say that this ayat of the Quran, وَمَا يَنْتِقُ عَنِ الْحَوَىٰ إِنْ هُوَ إِلَّا وَحْيٌ يُوحَىٰ, the Prophet does not speak out of his own will, but it is the wish of Allah. Do you know how they've done this? They've said actually it is only the revelation is from Allah and everything else is from the Prophet himself. He's a human being and his judgment is better than our judgment. That is the status that is given to the Prophet. His judgment is better than our judgment. And according to some companions, even that is not correct. They think their own judgment is better than the Prophet's judgment. And history is full of this. History is full of this. Where people have claimed that our judgment is better than the judgment of the Prophet. And they've even argued with the Prophet. Oh Prophet, what you are doing is wrong. And I was listening to, on television, Dr. Asrar Ahmed on TV, and he mentioned a hadith which made my blood boil. He said, he was talking about the Prophet's personality. He was saying that when the Prophet left Makkah and went to Medina, because Medina, as you know, is a city of date palms. Makkah is all mountainous, but Medina is a fertile land. And when the Prophet went there, he seen the people of Medina cross-fertilizing the date palms. Because in order to have fruit, you have to have cross-fertilization. And one year, this is according to Asrar Ahmed, he's quoting a hadith from, I don't know, from one of the Siyasitas. He was saying that one year the Prophet said, what happens if you don't do that? And the companions, they said, okay, the Prophet is saying, what happens if you don't do that? So we won't do it. The following year, their crop was very, very limited. And they approached the Prophet saying that, oh Prophet, you know what you said about what happens if we don't do this? What's happened this year, our crop is very limited. And this is now what it is alleged that the Prophet has said. But according to our sources, our Shia sources, this is not the case. The Prophet is meant to have said, you are more knowledgeable, I'm doing the translation of this hadith, you are more knowledgeable in the affairs of this world than I am. Can anybody believe this? This is again a fabrication against the Prophet. Now, this is just something which came to my mind. But coming back to the point which I was discussing, is Quran Natiq and Quran Samit. The Samit is amongst us. We as Muslims, the both major groups in Islam, they realize that the Quran is not sufficient in itself for us to have total guidance. We have to rely upon another source. And that source is the Prophet himself. The Prophet himself is the source of... Now listen. The Prophet is the primary source. Do you understand now the delicacy of Quran Natiq? He is the speaking Quran. It is not that he is doing the tashri' of the Quran, or he is the sunnah of what needs to be done. He is actually speaking the Quran. He is a speaking Quran. For it has been mentioned in hadith that with the Quran's revelation, there have been other revelations as well, which are not part of the Quran, but which explain the Quran. Because the Prophet is the one upon whose heart the Quran was revealed. And with this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the knowledge of the infinite wisdom which is in the Quran. Many of you have experienced this. We have many kuffars, hafiz of the Quran. And if you ask them a question regarding the Sharia, the Sunnah, many hafiz you come across, ask them one question. They are hafiz of the Quran, they should know everything. That's not the case. So the knowledge of the Quran is different. This is the point. The knowledge of the words of the Quran is different, but the knowledge of the meaning is different. So we have to turn to a source which knows the Quran, both its outer meaning and inner meaning. And this comes to succession now. Succession. The Prophet is now going, he's leaving this world. He now has to give this responsibility to somebody who is, like himself, the talking Quran. He has to give this responsibility because in the period of 23 years, all the aspects of Islamic society, Islamic economics, Islamic fiqh could not be given to the Prophet and given to the people immediately. The Prophet then conveyed that knowledge to the gate of knowledge, to Imam Ali. All ulama agree that the Prophet said, Ana Madinatul Ilm Aliyun Babuha. This has been mentioned in Sunni Shia sources that the Prophet had said that I am the city of knowledge and Ali is its gate. And Ali himself, Imam Ali, Imam al-Muttaqeen, has said. Now, you've heard this many times before, but if you look things on a slightly different focus, slightly different angle, it throws a different meaning to different things. You have heard this, that Imam Ali has said that I am the dot under ba. I am the dot under ba. You know, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Imam Ali said, I am that dot. Because without the dot, the ba becomes meaningless. And in order to give the Quran meaning, you have to turn to Quran Natiq. You have to turn to those who understand what the Quran is, who it's relating to. For the people, some of the companions, this is said in the Quran, they say we listen to the Prophet, and as soon as we go away from the Prophet, we have forgotten what he said. So these individuals are the ones about whom the Prophet has said, I am leaving two things. I am leaving two weighty things, two mighty things. That is the Quran, and the other is my Ahlul Bayt. For they will not separate until they come to me at the Hawz Qawsar. And the last word is, you will never go astray. You will never go astray if you follow these. And yesterday I just mentioned how our brothers, they have, or they claim that they worship the Ahlul Bayt, they claim that they respect the Ahlul Bayt, they remember the Ahlul Bayt, but when it comes to actual practicality, I talked about the aqaid is from somebody else, the fiqh is from somebody else, and yet we know that Imam Abu Hanifa was the student of Imam Jafar Sadiq. And yet, so we know that these individuals, their sources, but they set up their own fiqh. And the fiqh of these four Aima Arba of our brothers, that was accepted as the authentic fiqh, and anything else was rejected. And then when it came to hadith, people who were the enemies of Ahlul Bayt, their hadiths were accepted, but the hadiths of our Aima, they were not accepted by their muhaddisi, by their hadith narrators. Now, basically I have finished my introduction. Now I'm going to talk about something which this whole topic is about. Now, I said yesterday, the Prophet said, I was talking to Imran today, and he was saying that the word 73 factions or sects is actually means kasrat. It could be more than 73 factions amongst the Muslims. Not necessarily 73. It could exceed 73. That the Muslims might be divided in more than 73. It is acceptable. Yes, that is a possibility. And also I said, the Prophet of Islam, peace be upon him, said that my nation will follow in the footsteps of previous nations. And the people said, do you mean the Christians and the Jews? And the Prophet said, yes. So, and this hadith has been mentioned, I've said this before, both sources, both in Sunni and Shia sources, that the hadith has been narrated from the Prophet. Now, in order to understand change, I said there's three concepts what the Quran deals with, which is alter, change, and conceal. These three concepts are dealt with the Quran about Hazrat Musa's people, Hazrat Isa's people. These three things are discussed. And if we believe that this hadith is true, which it is, then no doubt there must be some sort of changes which occurred in Islam. Now, people might say, that is a very, very big allegation you're making, that there's been changes in Islam. And I said, in order to prove my point, I said that within a period of 50 years, they were killing the blood of the Prophet. Is this the Quran and the Sunnah? To kill Imam Hussain al-Islam? Was this the Sunnah? That taking captive the family of the Ahlul Bayt, taking them captive, taking their chadurs, taking their veils, and parading them in cities, was this implementation of the Quran and the Sunnah? No. So this happened in a period of 50 years. And if we go back in sequence, Then you have the poisoning of Imam Hassan alayhi salam. Then you have the martyrdom of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And then you have the oppression meted out on Bibi Fatima Zahra salamun alayha. And then you have the gardens of Fadak taken away from the only daughter of the Prophet. Was this implementation of the Quran and the Sunnah? And then when the Prophet is saying that I am going to write something for you, I am going to write something for you, and the people say that the Prophet, Mazallah, has become delirious, he doesn't know what he's saying. And Ibn Abbas, this hadith is mentioned in Bukhari, he cries, and it says in Bukhari that the beard of Ibn Abbas used to become wet when he used to remember Yom Khamis, the day of Thursday. He said, gosh, that we should have given the Prophet what he was asking for. He was only asking for a pen and paper. He wasn't asking for a sword to kill somebody. And the people around him were saying, and the Prophet says, Umu anni, go away from me. Go away from me. This is the words of the Prophet. Just one point on this. People have actually questioned this. They've said that if the Prophet asked this on Thursday and the Prophet passes away on Monday, you've got 3 days in which the Prophet could have written this down. It's an intellectual point. If the Prophet asked on Thursday, you still have a few days where the Prophet could have got somebody else and written this, whatever the Prophet was going to write down, and had this written down. The scholars have mentioned this, and they said, the scholars, that had the Prophet had written down what the people amongst him were saying, that he is delirious, he doesn't know what he is saying, had the Prophet had written down after Thursday, the people afterwards would have said, they would have said that, look, we don't accept what the Prophet has written down, because we objected even when he was alive. Do you understand that? The people who were objecting to the Prophet writing down in his life, how were they going to accept after? They were said, we were there when the Prophet was asking for the pen and paper, and we actually said, the Prophet doesn't know what he's doing, and now you are giving this will to us. It means nothing at all. The Prophet was delirious. This allegation would have eroded the foundations of the Quran and everything the Prophet stood for, because history would have written that people who were close to the Prophet were making these allegations. The Christians would have said this to us. He said, how can we believe you? For your own people who you respect, they were saying that the Prophet is delirious, and maybe the whole of the mission of the Prophet was through delirium. Maybe he was going through delirious patches of his life, and he was reciting things which were coming from not from Allah but from somewhere else. The whole basis of Islam would have been eroded. Just one point which I thought I'd mention, because it comes up over and over again. People ask this, and we say this, people ask this question, that why didn't Prophet write afterwards? This is the very reason. It's because had the Prophet written this down afterwards, people would have made this allegation that some of your close people to the Prophet were saying the Prophet didn't know what he was doing. Now, in the Quran, this is a dictionary of the Quran. It's called Mu'ajjim al-Mufaris lil-Alfaz al-Kareem. I was looking in this and I was counting the number of times the word Musa is used. And I counted, have a guess. Somebody have a guess how many times the word Musa is used in the Quran?
7 times. No? 7 times.
How many?
7 times.
7 times, nowhere near it.
No, no.
73?
No?
No, Isa maybe. 7 times.
I think that's Ibrahim, just maybe 7. I think, yeah. 137 times. I have in front of me. And everywhere where Musa is used, it comes up. If anyone wants to see this afterwards, they can. وَإِذْ وَعَدْنَا مُوسَى 40 لَيْلًا. It gives you the first sentence and then it gives you where it is in the Quran. It's a dictionary. Now, Hazrat Musa alayhi salam, now the reason why I'm mentioning this, because our Prophet said you will follow in the footsteps of the Jews and the Christians. Now, in the next few days, I'm going to talk about how the Jews and how the Christians changed their books. Because I said yesterday that the Quran is free from change. Because Allah has not taken guarantee for the Injil or the Torah. Allah has never in the Torah or Injil claimed that I will protect the Injil and the Torah. But for the Quran, it has categorically said that Allah has protected the Quran Himself. So the Quran is free from change. So there must be another source which was tampered with, which was altered, which was concealed, which was hidden. It cannot be the Quran, because the Quran is free from change. We know that. So the secondary source is the saying of the prophets himself. That was manipulated. It was altered. It was concealed. It was changed. And the proof of this, that this happened, is this. That it says about Imam Bukhari, the writer of Bukhari, that apparently he knew over 100,000 hadiths. That's a lot. He knew this off by heart. If you read any Bukhari, the chapter of the beginning, the Muqaddimah, the introduction, it talks about how many hadiths Imam Bukhari he knew off by heart, and it says it was over 100,000 hadiths. Now, out of those 100,000 hadiths, how many are mentioned in Bukhari? Is it 100,000? Is it 50,000? Is it 20,000? No. It's not more than 7,500. So what happened to the rest of the 92,500 hadiths that I knew? What happened to them? He threw them away. He remembered them, he put them to memory, but when it came to actually writing them down, he didn't write them down. Why? Did he doubt those hadiths? He didn't write them down? Obviously he did. Because if he felt that these hadiths were authentic, because Sahih Bukhari, it says Sahih Bukhari, in any chapter it says Sahih Bukhari, any book Sahih Bukhari. Everything which is in Bukhari is Sahih. That is their allegation, that everything in Bukhari is Sahih. But if you open Bukhari, you only find 7,500 hadiths. 7,500 hadiths, which come in a period of 23 years of the Prophet's life. And those 7,500 hadiths have to translate the Quran, which are over 6,500 ayats. It's not even one hadith for one ayat of the Quran. Because it then actually shrinks even further. From 7.5 hadiths, do these hadiths come from the Prophet's mouth itself?